The Realms of Conquest book series is about the world's only magical kingdom and their quest for peace. Paperback and ebook available on Amazon.com, or check out the free video book on YouTube. That's REALMIC. Book lovers unite! I'm Demethius Jackson, and you're listening to the Chapter 1 Podcast. The greatest stories ever written all begin with Chapter 1. In each episode, our guest authors will share their first chapters with you. This episode is for anyone who has lost a loved one. Today, I'll be speaking with Elizabeth Moore. She's the author of The Dreaming Road, which is a story that evolved from a diary she kept after the loss of her own daughter. It's a very powerful story, and the way this book actually came together is incredible. And I'm hoping that through her book and our conversation, that people who may be in grief right now or experiencing a loss will be able to find the motivation that they need to move forward. So stay tuned, because it starts right now.
The morning my daughter died, I woke and sat bolt upright in bed, my heart racing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. In my dream, dark spirits were chasing Callie. Thin, black, and waif-like, they surrounded her, tearing at her clothing, mocking her as she struggled to pull herself free. I tried to fight them, but my fingers swept through them as if they were vapor. I could only watch as Callie suddenly jerked herself from their grasp, her feet pounding the ground, her arms pumping as she sprinted away, her long hair within a breath of their reach. I could only watch as they drew closer, could only will her, "Run, my baby girl, run." Lately, it seemed, we were all moving through water. Across the bedroom, sunlight was filtering through the blinds, casting shadows on the bed. Outside, birds were calling in the warm spring morning, and a soft breeze swayed the curtains towards me as I looked across the window at the shoreline of the lake across the street. It was only a dream. I was halfway down the hall when I noticed a light coming from Callie's bedroom. To be a teenager again with no regard for things like electric bills. I swore I spent half my life following these kids around, shutting off lights in their wake. "Callie," I shouted, "time to get up." I cocked an ear as I sailed by, waiting for the familiar groan. Callie had become crankier and more withdrawn this year, at times downright nasty. Sometimes I couldn't help but think there must be something I'd done wrong. In those moments, I vowed to try harder. I turned and made my way toward my eldest closed door. Callie had gotten into trouble again yesterday, skipping school, coming home drunk from an afternoon party by the lake. We'd fought, but Callie and I were always fighting these days. I switched tacks, raising my hand to knock softly. "Cal?" Silence. "Come on, honey, are you up? I don't want to nag you." I listened intently for a moment, then tried the door. At least she hadn't locked herself in. Grasping the cool knob, I turned it slowly, waiting for an exasperated, okay, Mom." At first, I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. Wearing only a red and white ribbed t-shirt and a red lace thong, Callie was lying on her back on the floor, legs stretched out straight, hands clenched in tight fists at her sides. Her blonde hair lay tangled around a face as pale as porcelain. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling, eyebrows arched, and her lips were a dark purple blue. "Oh my God, Callie, wake up. What happened?" All sense left me as I fell to the carpet to pull her into my arms. "Tom," I screamed, rocking her, shaking her. I frantically checked for breathing and a pulse. Nothing. It was her face that frightened me the most. Frozen in time was an expression of absolute wonder and amazement. I'd never seen a look like that before. She looked as though the gates of heaven had opened up and ushered her inside. Tom rushed into the room, my son Anthony following close behind. "Don't let Anthony in here," I shouted frantically, waving my arms. "I think Callie's dead. Call 911. I could vaguely hear Tom as he spoke to the emergency operator saying something about a dead little girl. Diane. His fingers gripped my shoulder to shake me out of my shock. She wants to know if anyone can do CPR. CPR. Tom was trying to startle me into action. Cradling my daughter, I was nothing but a mother. I somehow completely forgot that I was a registered nurse. I shook myself and let her back down on the floor, rose to my knees, and placed my hands at the center of her chest, just above her breastbone. The danger with young kids is cracking their ribs. I pressed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I closed her perfect nose between my fingers, tilted her head back, breathed once, twice, again and again, until the operator suggested that Tom help me. I tried to show him how to perform chest compressions, but the clinician in me knew he wasn't compressing Callie's chest deeply enough. Harder. I'm afraid I'll hurt her. Darn it, Tom. Right now, a fractured rib would be the least of her problems. There was a loud knocking at the door. Anthony, go answer the door, I yelled. An instant later, the paramedics rushed into the bedroom. I'm a nurse, I called to them. I can help. No, ma'am, the man with the emergency kit responded. You best be over there if you don't mind. I stood against the purple wall of Callie's bedroom, shivering uncontrollably, watching them try to resuscitate my only daughter. After a long moment, I felt Anthony come up beside me. Mom? Yes, baby. Should I call Papa? Yes, I sighed, pressing him to me. Go call Papa. I watched as the paramedics gave Callie injections of epinephrine and attached portable EKG electrodes to her chest. They shocked Callie's heart. I watched them monitor with ferocity, willing the lines to spike, ordering them to come to life. Her body flounced, but there was no response. I'd seen that flat line so many times. Sadly, it had never meant that much to me. Anthony carried the phone into the room. Mom, he wants to talk to you. I took the phone, murmured into it, saying the words I would repeat over and over again, my eyes still glued to my lifeless child. For years afterward, the events of that day would remain burned into my memory like a red-heart brand seared onto bare skin. I found Callie lying unresponsive on the floor of her bedroom. What do you mean she's unresponsive? I described her appearance. I started CPR. The paramedics are here, but there's no response, Dwayne. Only a flat line. He knew what I meant. After all, we'd met in nursing school. He seemed unnaturally calm. I knew something like this was going to happen. I'm leaving work now. I'll meet you at the hospital. The police arrived as the paramedics rushed Callie to the waiting ambulance. Sirens blaring, they took off to the hospital. The police gently escorted me, Tom, and Anthony out of Callie's bedroom so they could begin their investigation. In my heart, I hoped for some kind of miracle. The EMTs would bring her back on the way to the hospital. The doctors would save her. But the professional in me knew that this was not possible. Callie was dead when I walked into her bedroom.
First, let me start by saying that it's absolutely amazing that you were able to take this experience that happened to you and turn it into something that can actually help other people that are going through something similar.
Yeah. I mean, that was what I wanted to do in the end, because after she passed, I looked for some guidance from people who had lost children by suicide or some books about it written by someone who had the experience. And there wasn't anything at the time out there. And so after a number of years, I mean, it's been 17 years since she passed away, I finally decided that it was time for me to take this novel that I've been working on for 10 years and put it out there in the hopes that it would help other people.
Can you talk a little bit about how you created the book, your writing process? Because it's pretty unique.
Yeah. It started off as a diary. On the day of my daughter's funeral, one of my very close friends suggested that I start a diary or start a journal about my experience of recovery from her suicide and her sudden death. And my friend said that if I remained true to that and wrote faithfully, after a number of years, I would be able to see my healing process And that really appealed to me because I'm a researcher and a writer, scientific writer anyway, and I had dabbled on and off at journaling as I was growing up. So I thought, well, maybe this will help. And then after a couple years, I thought, well, maybe I'll just kind of put this together as a memoir and kind of give it to my really close friends and people who helped me along the way. And this was about, 5 years or so after she passed that I started to put it together that way. But then kind of an amazing thing happened. After she passed, I started having these amazing dreams. And they were very vivid. They were very lucid. They were very real. It was like she was right there with me. And being a scientist and a researcher, I was like, what is this? Because they weren't fragmented. They weren't the way usual dreams are. And so I'd also kind of been keeping a record of the dreams. I would just kind of be like a qualitative researcher. And as soon as I had a dream, I would wake up, I would rush downstairs to my computer, and I would write down everything I could remember. And there were, I was getting messages in the dreams, like that she was okay and that she was happy and that heaven was beautiful. And that really kind of helped my healing process too. But then there was a time when I was working on the memoir and I was struggling with, and this is something that survivors of suicide really struggle with. They wonder what were the red flags that they missed. I was very involved at the time in going to school. I was working. I had a new boyfriend, and I thought there was something, that I missed because she'd never mentioned suicide. It never even crossed my mind that she was suicidal. So anyway, I was ruminating about that. And all of a sudden I started to hear this voice talking to me about what had been going on. And it was like, I didn't know what it was. And to this day, I still am not quite sure if it was her or my imagination or wishful thinking or not, but it was like, it was very insistent. And whenever I would sit down to write on my memoir, the voice would drive me nuts. And so finally, I just decided to suspend my disbelief and just ask this disembodied voice what it would like to tell me. And I started, the words came faster than I could write them down on paper. And when I finally looked at it later, I realized that she had been talking about all the events that led up to her suicide and what was really going on with her. And I was just kind of like blown away by this whole process that you could maybe actually communicate with somebody who passed on, that you could just sit down and get real quiet and real calm and ask them a question and you get an answer. And so I started doing some more of that because I was just fascinated by it. And then I started to realize that I could weave the two stories together because my story was only half of the story. And so that's how it became an inspirational novel, because I, as a researcher and a scientist, didn't feel comfortable marketing it as a memoir anymore, because how could I verify these events that she was describing happened to her in heaven? So then I decided I'd just change it into an inspirational novel. People can take from it what they will that will help them. And I'll just do it that way.
It sounds like you were associating writing, and then you started kind of getting a message through the association writing, because, when you're doing that, your mind isn't fully aware, you're just you're open and you're receiving.
It's exactly right. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah. And I'll talk about this later on, but I lost my mom about 5 years ago, and there were things that happened after her passing that made me question my sanity, things that to this day I can't explain. But there is a philosophical duality in your book that's woven into the story, and I think makes it that much more powerful. For example, what inspired The Dreaming Road is pretty tragic, yet the book itself is inspirational. And it's also grounded in both life and death and physical and metaphysical. There's just so many different elements that are at odds, yet it all comes together naturally.
Yes. I went to several mediums that kind of helped channel her. And I was also, went to see a spiritual healer. And so some of the profound philosophical information about life. So it was fascinating. It was just fascinating. And, I struggled watching her because I could see her voice and her manner of speech and everything like that change. And I thought, being a nurse, okay, does she have a really interesting split personality disorder or is she really channeling something, But the words that came through her were so profound that I just thought, well, however she's getting them, this is so helpful to me that I'm going to put it in the book. And so that's why I included a lot of that metaphysical stuff, because it kind of helps you get beyond the tragedy of the experience and start to learn some of the lessons in terms of why you're here and how you're meant to grow and how you can find joy even in circumstances which many people would label tragic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So after my mother passed away, I was kind of looking for answers as well. And I started having these really vivid dreams that were just completely clear. And one dream specifically, I remember I was trying to watch a football game and my mother kept coming into the room and asking me about things, about her passing. She was asking me, did you do this? And did you talk to this person? And I knew it was real because I started getting annoyed like I normally would.
Yes. Yes.
And then when I woke up, I just remember just feeling her. I don't want to call it an aura or an essence, but it's the feeling I used to get when I walked into her house and I knew she was home. And so the divine virtues. So after I started experiencing these things, I started asking, these questions, well, where is my mom? Is she still out there somewhere? Is she just an energy form? And I found this show, one of the episodes that he was interviewing a person that was talking about divine virtues. And the virtues are basically the lessons that our spirit is here on earth to learn.
Right.
And it's easy to figure out what yours are, because what you do essentially is you look at all of the adversity that you face throughout your life, no matter how little, no matter how large. And there's like 3 common themes between all of them. And when you identify what those themes are, those are the virtues your spirit is here to learn.
Yes, that's kind of like something that my daughter described, that you go into this cavern and you pull down, I think they were described as bubbles, although other people described them as ribbons of things that you want to learn, like if you want to learn charity, or you want to learn perseverance. Yeah. You pull down these ribbons of these qualities that that your soul wants to encompass more completely. And then you have experiences in life that will help you integrate those core values, shall we say. So when you cross back over, you embody more of them than you did when you first came here. So I think one of the ones that I pulled down was forbearance and love. So, and that's where you kind of have to learn to, instead of feeling like a victim and feeling like the world is against you, you have to kind of turn that around in your heart and think, okay, what is the gift? What are these experiences meant to teach you?
I can tell that a lot of thought and a lot of experiences went into the creation of your book. The very first thing that caught my attention was your book cover. I think it illustrates that duality I was talking about earlier.
It does. It was meant to.
Because at first glance, it's an image of a woman. But then when you look closer, there are these details that begin revealing themselves.
Right. What it is for me, from my perspective, when I look at it, it's like, I don't know if you've ever heard this. There's a Cherokee legend called the Legend of the Two Wolves. And the legend of the two wolves is that there's 2 wolves that live inside us. One is darkness, and one is light. And the dark wolf is like grief and despair and anger and hatred and greed. And the light wolf is like charity and hope and kindness and love. And the young boy asked the old Indian shaman, well, which wolf wins? And the shaman said, the one that you feed. And so for me, there's that duality there. There's always going to be, situations that can lead you into darkness. but there's always help from the angelic realm that can help you find the light. But the book itself is about that duality of experience. And there's always that battle going on inside of us. Mm-hmm. So that's how the cover came. I mean, I was kind of describing that to the cover designer, and he, didn't put two wolves on the cover, but he put the kind of symbolic thing that I was trying to convey.
Okay. Now that you're mentioning it, it makes so much sense. Because, there's a full color image, and then kind of faded in the background, there's a darker image. And the darker image actually kind of looks like a film negative. But then I was thinking, well, maybe it's representing physical life, and maybe one's representing spirit. Yeah. Like, there was just so many directions you could go with that book cover. The other thing that surprised me about your story was it's actually a collaboration with your daughter. What did you think when you first started receiving her words as she started painting this picture of the afterlife for you?
Well, at first, I didn't know whether to believe it or not. To be honest with you, I was not sure, because I was for quite a long time. I had what I guess therapists would term complicated grief and some post-traumatic stress, obviously, from the first chapters. That's just pretty much exactly what happened. So I didn't know at first whether my mind was just trying to make sense of stuff and I was just trying to process things, or whether I was really hearing her. But the thing that kind of convinced me is very similar to what convinced you. It was her personality was coming through so strongly that I couldn't believe that I was just making it up. So it's very similar to your experience in that way.
Yeah. And there are two distinct personalities in their sections of the book. And in one sense, it gives it authenticity. And in the other sense, it's kind of a little spooky, at least for me.
Yeah. I've kind of dabbled in this for a number of years, and I started getting a little interested in afterlife communication and things like that when I was a nurse in the hospital. And I would be sitting down having dinner with some of the other nurses, and they would talk about how one of their patients in the ICU was hallucinating again and supposedly talking to some person they thought was a dead relative, and that we're having to sedate him more. So I thought, well, that's really interesting, and I was kind of exploring all Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stuff and looking at some of the information that was coming out at the time about near-death experiences. So I always had a little bit of openness to that.
While you were writing the book, did you tell anyone what was happening?
Very few people. I'm a nurse researcher at Vanderbilt. Nobody at Vanderbilt knew anything about it. My sister's kind of a traditional fundamentalist Christian, so I didn't tell her either. And that was one of the things too that kept me from publishing the book for so long, because I was really worried about what my academic credentials at Vanderbilt and what people were going to think of me when they knew I had all this other, that I was dabbling in, after death communication, talking to mediums, and in a class with someone who was a physical channel for an angel. I mean, I didn't know whether I was going to get fired on the spot. So, and, and also I was getting, I'm in my mid 60s now. So I was starting to think, well, I don't want to die with this book inside me, because I also know you never know. So I thought, well, I just better do it. So, and actually Vanderbilt prides itself on being a really liberal university. So actually the response has been really, really positive. None of the negative things that I was concerned about have happened.
To lose a loved one, just in general, is just a gut-wrenching experience. And
yes, it is.
Even with my mom, now that, it's been 5 years and, there's some distance between myself and that loss, the hole that she left in my life has stayed with me. And, I'm 37 now, and I feel like it's always going to be there. I guess my question for you is, how do you find the strength to promote this book when it's, you're so close to the story?
Yeah, it's I mean, well, let me just give you an analogy. When I was going back to work after she passed away, I was a maternity nurse, and I'm a breastfeeding consultant. So I was spending a lot of time on the postpartum unit, helping young girls breastfeed their babies. And I was having a really hard time with that emotionally, because I had just lost my daughter and all my hopes and dreams for her getting married and having babies and stuff like that. And then I started thinking, well, maybe if I just pretend like each one of those girls is my daughter, that will help me through it. That really eased the pain so much. And so even though I'm still kind of immersing myself in this painful experience by reading that first chapter and talking about the book, I know that's going to help so many people that it eases the pain in that way. So that's my feeling about it. And also, one of the things with post-traumatic stress is a lot of people bury it, and they don't want to go back there, and they don't want to talk about it, and they just want to move on and pretend like it never happened. But then it festers inside them. And so when I'm talking about it, I'm bringing a little bit more of that pain to life, bringing it to the surface so that it will ease as I talk about it, and as time moves on, because I don't think you can bury pain like this. I think you have to work through it and get to the other side, and you have to let yourself experience those emotions in order to be able to let go and move on with your life.
Yeah, that's so important, to allow yourself to experience whatever that grief is going to be. And even those little grief bubbles that used to pop up even years later, I could be fine, normal day, minding my business. All of a sudden, just out of nowhere, I'd hit a little grief bubble. I'd have to just kind of go find a quiet place to deal with it. With people who are experiencing, a loss of a loved one or someone that they were close with, they really are out there trying to find information to kind of help them get through it. And that's why, I think your book is that important, because it's another tool that they can use to help them get through that grief process.
Right.
And people have, of course, different beliefs. And for people who are interested in, like afterlife communication and the things that you did, are there any resources that you could recommend that could help them?
Yes. If you go to my website, www.thedreamingroad.com, I have listed resources for after-death communication. There's several organizations that, are collecting people's experiences of after-death communication and are trying to validate some of those experiences. And also there's related websites on near-death communication. So it's all on my website. If you just go to the link for resources about after-death and near-death experiences. And I think I have some resources on there for grief and loss and also for suicide survivors. So I've got a I kind of feel like people need to be able to access that stuff. So it's all on my website.
Do you have any advice that you would give to people reading your book who may have experienced a similar loss?
The book is challenging for people, especially early on in the grieving process, because it generates so much emotion, especially if they've lost a family member to suicide or if it's been a sudden or traumatic death. And so sometimes they just get into the early part of it and it's too heavy, but the story gets lighter and the message of hope gets really strong towards the end of the book. The book is going to give you some really helpful resolution in the end. And so I just hope that people will stick with it. And if they find themselves really finding it too heavy, that they get help themselves, because they probably need to process a little bit more of their own pain.
Yeah. Do you have any advice to give, perhaps a young person who may be going through a depression or maybe even be considering hurting themselves?
It's really important for kids, if they're starting to feel really, really depressed, to find help somewhere. my daughter had 3 really, really close girlfriends, and she never confided to anyone, not even them, that she was feeling really depressed. And they were as shocked as I was. And it's easy, I think, too, to feel alone in the world. I mean, we have all these ways that we connect now, through the internet and stuff like that, but we kind of losing that personal human connection with people. And so I think it's really important for someone, if they're really depressed, to try to reach out for help, to trust someone enough to let them know how they're really feeling, whether it's a close friend, a counselor at school, minister at church, a family member, to not let it fester inside, because if you try to just bury it or just try to deal with it on your own, it gets worse. That would probably be the message that I would communicate to those kids, is that there are people out there to care that will help, and they don't have to carry it alone.
Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for speaking with me today and for providing comfort to people who are dealing with this grief. You're doing important work.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that you wanted to discuss?
If people would like to communicate with me, want to talk to me personally, I do have a place on my website where they can contact me by email, and I'll definitely respond. And I just hope that people who are listening to this podcast and who experience the loss of a loved one will hopefully find some hope and some peace, and know that there will be a brighter day. It just takes a little time.
And with that, we're going to wrap up another episode. Thank you once again to Elizabeth Moore. And if you have a question for her, she can be reached at thedreamingroad.com. If you have a question or a comment for me, or you know an author who you think would be a good fit for the show, let me know. Connect with me on social media. I'm on Facebook, YouTube, or send an email to info@ch1podcast.com. Check out ch1podcast.com, where you can listen to previous episodes and hopefully find your next favorite author. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Overcast. And most importantly, leave us a review and tell everyone you know about the show. That's it for me. You all stay awesome. Till next time.